Hello, so today we're going to be going over encounters in TFT set 14. So this is going to be an overview as well as a guide with some general tips on how to play around the encounters, which is the opening thing that kind of starts the game off and kind of sets the tone for how you're going to play the game. Because sometimes your strategy might change based on these encounters, and this will help you to kind of navigate through that a little bit more easily. Before we get much further, please make sure to like and subscribe. It helps me out as a smaller TFT content creator. Of course, if you're coming back from watching previous content that I've made and it's helped you in your ranked journey, I usually do a daily TFT guide or some VOD reviews and sometimes some for fun stuff like tier lists and other things like that. We're working on our 10,000 sub goal, so if we hit that, it would be amazing. So thank you very much for everybody supporting me up until now, and we're almost there. So let's see if we can get there. RP giveaway. So let's go through the encounters. So I'm going to go through them in order of odds of appearing. So the ones that you're going to see the most frequently to the least frequently. So we're starting with Vi, which is component anvils. Basically, it's an 8% encounter and it's typically low variance. I like to say like low variance or high variance, and I color code them. But typically, component anvils, pretty low variance. The idea is that it's very flexible. Reroll often could be really good with this because you're going to have early components that you can easily make the items and basically like commit to a decision early and guarantee those good items on the units that you want. Think like units like Morgana where you need multiple tiers or things like that. But typically you can just make early items and kind of play around that. Often what I suggest is to try and win streak in certain cases if you have a good board, just because you're going to be able to make those early components, make those early items. If you have some upgraded units, you can make the items to fit those upgraded units and just try and send it and be really strong. And otherwise you should also try to just keep up with the lobby, not lose too much HP with that. Next we have Annie. So Annie drops 3 gold augments. So this is an 8% encounter, and typically it's also considered to me to be a little bit less variance or pretty low variance, making it like, not too awkward of a game to play. The idea is that it's very simple. Anything kind of goes, any strategy that you have, because the gold augments in general have like a wide variety of applicability. There's lots of them. They have all sorts of different things. So, and they give you all sorts of different resources. So a lot of times it just comes down to your prioritization of the augments and what's important for you. A lot of times econ early is really good. Items are really important in this patch. So a lot of times I say econ early, combat, and an item augment, and that's usually your mixture in order to make sure that your board is going to scale well into late game. Additionally, you can also occasionally hit good options because you're seeing all gold. Now, the odds of this are very little. I want to make that very clear. I'm not saying this is a valid strategy all the time, but it is something you could play towards if you're like really trying to get a first or a high roll. With gold augments, because you're seeing a lot of the gold augments, if you see an augment and you roll past it, you can't see it again. So that in conjunction with augment tailoring, which is something that happens like if you play certain units on your board, typically you can get offered augments that relate to those units. Think like if you have like anima in, you're more likely to get an anima emblem augment. So you can sometimes occasionally hit good options by thinning out the pool, finding those augments that are tailored to your traits, like flatline for marksman, etc. The odds of it aren't that much greater, but it is something that you see people sometimes talk about or play around when you're talking about gold augments. So I just want to mention it here, but that's like another thing that comes into play sometimes or occasionally. Next we have Nico. So Nico is Scuttle, Puddle, or Crab Rave. I kind of group them together because they're very similar. Together it's around a 9% encounter. Also, I want to make it very clear, some of the percentages might be wrong. I'll say it here just in case. Some of the percentages of how often they occur, there's a chance it's wrong just because I've checked multiple websites. I tried to consolidate it, but there was recently a change with some of the encounters, so I think these are the ones that are accurate. I tried to like double check with some of the dev drop slides and things like that. But just be aware, like, it's not too much of a big deal if it occurs more or occurs less. I think it's a 9% encounter, split 6% Scuttle, and 3% Crab Rave. Typically, Scuttle Puddle is considered, to me, to be very high variance. Basically, the idea is that high rollers high roll harder. That's like the thing, the triple H of TFT. If you're in a spot where you're very strong and you're win streaking and you're doing well, Scuttle Puddle is going to grant you gold. So a lot of times when you're pushing levels, you're not able to hit econ intervals, you're trying to upgrade your boards. If you hit your units really early, you're going to have so much extra resources with this gold that you can push levels, you can go level 9, you can find legendaries early, you can upgrade those legendaries early, you can scale with like things like Zax and Garens. So a lot of times, like if you're in a high roll spot, like if you just like, you're playing a 4-cost comp, you hit them all early, they're all upgraded, and you just instantly teleport to a high level board. If you're somebody who doesn't high roll, like, even though you have a lot of gold, you know, you're going to be facing much stronger boards that are going to outscale you, that outpace you very easily. That's what happens when you dump a lot of gold and a lot of resources into the lobby. It basically comes down to, do you actually like hit your board at a relative pace? It's not like unplayable or anything like that, but I just want to let you guys, like, I just want to give you guys like a general idea when you're thinking about Crab Rave. You know, if you're in a bad spot, you have to really try to salvage it, because you're going to be fighting some giga strong, insanely high cap boards, because people are going to have so much ability to hit those high caps very easily. A lot of times, because Scuttle gives you a lot of gold anyways, you can try to avoid econ augments. Of course, there's strategies with certain boards, like, you know, if you're trying to fast 9 or anything like that, that you take double econ and Scuttle and you get like all sorts of gold and stuff. But typically speaking, you're going to be better off with things like items or things like combat power, because the chances are you're going to have enough gold to get to your board and hit your board, assuming that, like, you know, things go moderately okay for you. Additionally, you want to play boards that can cap high with many items, because you usually get a little bit of extra items on Scuttle. So you want to look towards boards that you're itemizing towards multiple carries or multiple tanks, and have that in mind into your late game of who you're going to put your spare items on. Often you want to play boards that also can cap out with 5 costs. You want to hit those high cost units to do insane damage to the rest of the lobby. Like, you know, I talk about 5 costs a lot. You often might hear other people, especially even me, like, it's a very common thing to say that, like, you know, reroll is typically bad in Scuttle. That's just because rerolls kind of like are the antithesis of Scuttle. It's kind of like, you know, you're playing a comp that's supposed to be really consistent and you're spending your gold early, but if everybody's going to hit some really high cap, a lot of times the reroll comps are going to be severely outscaled, that even if you hit your units, you know, other people are going to be like level 9, level 10 with like 100 upgrades. It's like your reroll is just not going to be able to keep up. However, if you have a good reroll spot, it's still fine, right? I play reroll in Scuttle all the time. It's just like you have to have a really good spot for it, because if you have that good spot, then you're going to be like the high roller that's high rolling harder. You can hit all of your reroll units, and then you can still push levels, get to like level 8, level 9, fit in those massive synergies, get those high cost units in that are going to spike your board and make it really strong into the late game so that you get your top 4 or even a first. So just want to make that very clear. Be careful with those ideas. Another thing that I didn't mention on this slide, you can also try and aim towards comps that are very expensive. There's some comps that, you know, you might want to play multiple 4 costs, or you might want to play like 5 costs, or you're really reliant on 5 costs. Those comps can be a little bit better, because obviously you're going to have extra gold with Scuttle. Next, we have Aurora, Prismatic first, Prismatic last. This is a 10% encounter, 5% first, 5% last. And then I would say that it's either low or high variance. Prismatics themselves are often very specific to certain comps, and that's where the variance can come into play. If it's Prismatic first, you can structure your game around it. There's not many game-breaking options. At least this set, it feels like most of the ones that are like really egregious are the black market ones. So that's like, you know, an encounter on top of an encounter, which is like, you know, we'll see if that actually happens that often. It doesn't really, but it could. But otherwise, you're generally okay. You just take your first Prismatic, and then your later augments are to supplement that, right? If you take a Prismatic Econ, then you want to take Combat later. If you take a Prismatic Combat early, you know, maybe it's not the greatest, but it could be okay. Then you want to, like, take the, like, you know, Combat or Econ or other stuff. Whatever you're missing, you want to fill in with the other augments. So you can play around it. Prismatic Ender, however, is very much high variance, right? If you have just a Prismatic at the end of the game, the reason it's really bad is because if you, like, how do I phrase it? Starting out your game early, you can kind of like decide on the Prismatic, because the Prismatics are typically going to be stronger augments than in general. If you end the game, or you have a Prismatic that you have to pick on stage 4, the Prismatic combats are going to be so much more powerful. So if somebody hits a Prismatic combat that fits particularly well with their board's going to have a lot more power than your board, because it's just going to be so powerful with that Prismatic combat. So a lot of times when you're looking at the last Prismatic augment, if it's Prismatic Ender, you're kind of crossing your fingers and hoping that you hit a really strong augment that will actually spike your board really powerful. Additionally, I've had it happen where the last augment offered was a black market one, and then I just got like a giga win condition, because some of the black market ones have insane win conditions. I'm gonna make a video on black market augments, because I think some of them need like a little bit of a tutorial, because like you might not know about certain broken combinations with them. But in general, the Prismatic Ender is going to be a lot more variance for that reason. Additionally, there's a lot of prismatics that kind of do nothing for a particular board. You can think of stuff that's like, gives AP, gives items that you might not need. Maybe you have all your items itemized already, or sorry, all your carries itemized already. So there's a lot of times where you just roll into a prismatic at the end and they're not applicable, and now you are down a lot of combat power relative to other boards, and that's where the variance can come into play a lot. So just be aware of that. If it's Prismatic Ender, just know that things can come crashing down, and you should try and play a little bit safer if you don't have a really insane spot to kind of win out with that. But of course, any comp could be good. There's not really a strategy in picking the comp in particular with these situations. You just want to try and play around something the best that you can. Next, we have Garen or Wandering Golem. So this one is the one that everybody kind of knows as being like the giga RNG one. Just 4% encounter. It's really considered high variance because you basically get a golem with a bunch of emblems attached to it. Now they changed the golems to kind of be a little bit nicer in terms of like giving you a frying pan and a spat, which makes it a lot easier to play around. Just the way spatula emblems are, like, I forget what they're called. They're like origins and traits or whatever. They kind of mesh better into each other than having multiple of the same type. So that's really nice. But typically you're going to try and make use of at least 2 emblems. You can try and cook up a board that uses all the emblems, but typically you're happy if you're using just 2 of the emblems. A lot of times, obviously, the emblems dictate your board. This is where the variance comes into play. Of course, you're basically forced to play around your golem, because if you just choose to not play around your golem, you really have to have an insane board to do that, because you're just down so much, because you're down a whole unit that's just not activating synergies in the form of the golem, and the synergies themselves, like, other people are going to hit those higher thresholds a lot more easily and have much more flexible, powerful boards if you just ignore your golem. So you have to take into account the golem. You have to use the golem. So the worst part, like, I wouldn't say like, this person hit a broken emblem. Like, that's crazy. It's more so like when your golem is a contested golem. Like, I played a game today where the entire lobby had Exotech on their golem, or like, I think 6 out of the 8 people had an Exotech emblem on their golem. So it became like all the Exotech units were very hard to find. And for like some people like mine, my golem, it's like there was very little else I could play from my spot. And it was just a horrible game. Like, I still managed to salvage a 5th in that game, so I was really happy with it. But I'm just saying, like, when it's contested golem, when somebody has the same golem as you, you're just forced into a spot where you're gonna have like a hard time, and other people just have the freest game ever because they get to just like play any line that they want uncontested because their golem is different from everybody else's. Of course, you can also play to match like the golem itself, right? Like, you want to match items, you want to play for placements, try and fix board up, but additionally you can try and chase those win conditions. The win conditions being like, you hit 2 or 2 of the same spat, right? Like if you have an anima emblem, a street demon emblem, things like that, you can always play for like those win conditions if you have those win conditions on deck. But a lot of times, like, I think in the average case scenario, you're usually just going to be playing for placements, trying to make a strong board out of whatever your golem is, and maybe you could just get a first because you just hit something crazy. Next we have Twisted Fate. So Twisted Fate is gold subscription. So gold subscription, I think it's a 4% encounter. I think it's a little bit low variance. It's sometimes high roll, similar to like Scuttle, puddle, and those other ones where I was talking about pumping resources, making your board a lot stronger. Just pumping gold could help out a lot, because if you hit your board early, if you're pushing levels, you're playing aggressively, it can obviously be really beneficial. I would always think about expensive boards when I see gold sub. If you take like, augments that help you to level up, for example, like level up with gold sub, and then you can just like push really high levels. Or if you're playing around multiple 4-cost carries or multiple 5 costs, this can be something that's really helpful. It's very flexible because like you can just play whatever, right? You're just getting extra gold. Reroll, if you're playing it similar to Scuttle Puddle, because people are going to be pumped with extra gold, they're going to be able to hit those higher levels, maybe find those early 5 costs, scale well into late game. You want to make sure your reroll spot is really good if you're committing to this. Additionally, sometimes you might want to avoid econ augments. I'm not saying that's an always food, but it's a sometimes food, of course, just because you might start out with a lot of gold, right? If the first gold drops, because it happens at the beginning of every stage, is a large amount, then you can decide, okay, I might skip econ augments this game because I'm already making interest. I'm going to be rich enough. I'm going to be fine as is. And you want to adjust your strategy fast based on the gold given. Sometimes you just get dropped an insane amount of gold and you have to decide, am I leveling? Am I rolling deep? Am I rolling for 3 stars? What am I doing here? So you have to always pay attention. Make sure to grab your gold as early as possible in a round and just see like, okay, how much gold is it? What is my intervals? Am I able to level here? Am I able to roll? Do I roll? You have to adjust based on that. Next we have Urgot. So this is the big one, the loot sub. Everybody knows this one, similar to Wandering Trainers, right? Or Wandering Golems, 4% encounter, giga high variance. So with loot sub, we're actually going to go through the loot sub tables, but basically you want to play boards that spike with spatulas often, just because spatula drops are usually the ones that you have to play around. But basically you're just going to get some sort of random loot from this and you just have to play around it. And sometimes it can put you in really good Exodia win conditions, artifacts, items, spatulas, somebody hits like 10 of a something. But also you want to be prepared for flexible pivots, just because if you get something from loot sub that you could find something to play around it a little bit better than what you're currently playing, you got to be able to think on the fly. A lot of times I would say avoid rerolls or forcing boards. Here I put built diff. I'm pretty sure they removed built diff from the set, so it's not a thing anymore. But the idea still stands. I just want to say you want to avoid rerolls and sorry, maybe I should rephrase. You don't necessarily want to avoid rerolls or forcing boards, but I recommend avoiding these forcing boards, just because with loot sub, if you get loot that you just can't play around, let's say I'm playing an AP line reroll and I get dropped an Orn artifact, and the Orn artifact I open it and it's nothing that I can use for my board, then it's I feel like I'm in a much worse spot because my reroll comp already is in super high cap. That's typically how rerolls are. They get outscaled by some of these crazy expensive high cost comps. So I lose a lot of the consistency aspect of it, which makes it difficult. And the same with forcing boards. If I take a board that's extremely forcing and I don't have the conditions for it, and then all of a sudden I can't make use of the loot that I'm getting dropped, that's really risky. So I would always recommend to have 1 or 2 ideas, a pivot option, so to speak, just to try and salvage the game if things start to go wrong, or else they can go wrong really fast, very quickly. And then of course you could always play for the high roll, right? Take emblem augments. You can also take Orn artifact augments, try and get some wicked combos that you can just win out for free, and you can often play for the high roll. Try and play it with the intention that you have something that you can win out with. If you have no options to win out, then you can often, if you play too safe, in loot sub, and you don't have a win condition, then a lot of times you will just end up being 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th, just based on the fact that everybody else has some sort of insane board that they ended up hitting. So if we were talking about loot sub, before we go any further, I just want to show you this. This is on tactics.tools. It's just the website that I use, but these are the drops that you can get from loot sub. So when I was saying you usually want to play around a board that gets a spatula, loot sub has a 14% chance of getting you a spatula. It doesn't necessarily give you a frying pan, but it's just something to keep in mind. Of course, there's other things like support items, artifacts. This is what I was saying, that you don't want to be too forcing of a comp, just because if you get something like spatula or artifact, you want to be able to play around those. So at least consider comps where you have an idea of what to use the spatula for, or you have an idea of who to use an Orn artifact on with your particular comp that you're playing. But typically you're going to get something, so just be aware of that, and then pay attention to the other players in the lobby to make sure that you are cognizant of what's going on. Next we have Zach, which is all prismatics. So all prismatics could be low variance or high variance. I typically consider them to be kind of a mixture in between. It really depends on who hits what. A lot of times you can really cap out really high with prismatic combat, especially if you get 2 prismatic combats, so boards can be extremely strong. But you can also fall really far behind without combat, so you gotta be really careful, because you want to balance the same way you usually balance econ and other things. You want to balance econ, combat, and items the same way, except the prismatics are often a little bit more specific. Sometimes because they have really powerful effects, they don't fit in with all the boards, so to speak, so you gotta be really careful about that. Sometimes there's high roll options, of course, so pay attention, make sure you're scouting your lobby to adjust your strategy based on that. Next we have Zed, which is the artifact anvils. So this is a 3% encounter, and it's typically considered to be a high variance. Basically you get an Orn artifact, and you have to decide. A lot of times you can take a quote-unquote winning artifact, which is something that has a really good combination with a particular unit. For example, Trenchcoat Graves right now is one of the stronger options, but there's lots of other ones. And the idea is that you want to take them, and maybe win out with it and like play that thin margin and have a very forcing game, or you want to just take an artifact that's more generic that you can just apply to multiple units and play for a more consistent top 4. Lobbies can get out of hand really fast, so just be aware. Always pay attention to like, okay, that person has a win condition, that person has a win condition. Okay, so I'm playing for like a 3rd or a 4th here. I should play very safe because I might not be able to outcap those players, and then I'm just chasing like a bad spot, right? And I'm just like, you know, down bad, just losing the game for free. A lot of times you want to, this is the big part that makes it really high variance, is that you want to really hit an artifact that fits your board. A lot of times if you start with an early game and you rip open an Ornn artifact and you don't hit something that fits your board, it feels really bad, and you can often have a really bad stage 2. And if other people are steamrolling and getting further ahead and getting really strong, you're now playing with like a huge HP deficit, trying to find a way to salvage it and play around the Ornn artifact. Something that does help if you're trying to go for like a high roll win condition game, however, is to take artifact augments. A lot of Ornn artifacts are really strong in tandem with each other because they have these really powerful unique effects. So if you stack them with each other, it can often make like these broken situations where you see, and that's where you see like all the TikToks and stuff of like this artifact with this artifact and I just win the game for free. So you can actually go for stuff like that. Like Trenchcoat with like a lot of stuff usually is like the enabler, or like Zonya's with some stuff is a good enabler. Things like that, just consider it. Next, this is the second part of the video, so now we're going to talk about the hacked encounters. So these are some of the ones where it shows up and it's like hacked encounter, and it talks about some extra sauce that it can give you, and these ones often are a little bit more awkward or crazy, and the games sometimes are a little bit more like wacky, but we'll talk about it as we go through them. So we have Aurelian. I meant to write Aurelian Soul, my bad, I wrote Aurelian Sun, but please, Aurelian Soul fans, don't get upset at me, but this is the treasure armory one. So the idea is that it's a 5% encounter. This can be low variance or high variance because the treasure armory can actually vary from different types of armories, so to speak. You really want to be prepared for this. It's at the end of stage 4, and because there's different kinds of loots, which we will go over in a second, just be aware of it, that you can play around it. Here are the main tips that I would say when I'm thinking about treasure armory. You want to make sure to complete items without leftover components. A leftover component is very weak and useless, right? What do you do with a cloak? It's 20 magic resist. That's fucking nothing. That's worth nothing, right? You know what is worth something though? Making that into a completed item. So generally what you want to do is when you go through the treasure armory, you want to count the amount of components that you're getting and try and complete all of your items. That's usually my priority when I'm thinking about it. But also, you generally want to take the first solid option that makes sense with your board. Don't go digging for a win condition unless you really have to. And some of them actually give you spats and frying pans, so you can actually dig for like that +1, +2 if you really need to. When we're thinking about the treasure armory, it looks kind of like this. So there's the normal ones. These are the ones that aren't super high variance, and a lot of times they give you a gold augment and components or something like that. So what I was trying to say is that make sure that your components and or items work out to an even number so that you have so that you're not left over with extra components. That's usually my priority. And then you're also looking for an augment that fits in with your board pretty nicely. These ones are pretty okay. You can also take champ dupes to like bail out your board or go for like some crazy shit. But there's also the potential to get spatulas in a lot of these. But typically you're just going to be getting gold augment and some components, or silver augment and some components. Additionally, there's these other ones like order and then chaos, where they become really crazy, and I've had one game with this. I think I don't remember if it happened ever again, or if it was like in PBE. I still don't remember because I have not seen this very often, but just to keep in mind, there could be some wacky ends to games, so just be careful about that. Next we have Golem Armory. So here I didn't have to picture the golems from in-game, but I'm actually made them on a separate picture, so I'm going to go back to it in a little bit. But basically it's a 5% encounter. It's typically low variance. Basically at the end of stage 4, you're going to have to pick between a frontline, a backline, or an RNG golem. So the way that they are structured, frontline golem usually has, I believe it's Warmogs, Innervating Locket, which is just like a tank Ornn artifact that heals max health, and now with the new Ornn artifact Indomitable, which is the one where basically stun immunity and it pulls in units. So this is just a really strong, reliable frontline tank. Then there's the backline one, which has Guinsoo, Fishbones, and RFC, so just a bunch of attack speed, and there's just like random targeting and AD. And there's the RNG Golem, which is the newer one that replaced the previous gold generation golems. It will give you a Radiant item, an Ornn artifact and a emblem. I believe it's usually a frying pan one, but I might be wrong about that, but it gives you an emblem. And the idea is that with the RNG one, you usually just take it. Maybe you can play around it. Usually they make sense with each other. Like from what I've seen, the artifacts and the items and the emblems like coincide. Like if it's a tank, it's kind of like still fits that role. It's not like you're gonna get like a death blade and then an artifact that's like an AP artifact. I don't think it's like pure random. I think they're like a little bit like set up in a way that's still gonna be useful in some way or meaningful in some way. Personally, if I was giving advice, I generally take frontline or backline. I've actually started to avoid RNG. So I took the RNG one 3 times, and all 3 times I regretted taking it. So I've now adjusted my strategy and say, you know what, I'll try the RNG maybe another time if I really need to, but it's not my default choice. Because when they first added it to the game, I was like, I gotta try it out a couple times so I can get a little bit more of an informed opinion on it. I generally take the frontline one the most, and I'll explain why in a second. But generally speaking, frontline or backline, it just comes down to like if you need more frontline or if you need more backline. So look at your board, think to yourself, like look at your last fight, how it went, pay attention while you're playing the game, right? Especially if you know that it's Golem armory, just pay attention to the fights on your stage 4. Is your frontline dying before your backline? Is your frontline super stable and you just want more damage? Decide. A lot of people say it's always frontline, a lot of people say it's always backline. I've heard both. I personally like frontline Golem a lot because if I'm unsure if I need one or the other, I just like to have more frontline because more frontline will usually translate to my backline being able to do more damage. That's just how I like to see it. I think the frontline Golem as well has just really good setup. I think this guy can actually tank a lot, and especially now with Indomitable, I've actually seen this guy, like, you put him like second row or something, and then he like griefs the opponent's backline. He just pulls them in, right? If you put him on same side as enemy carry somewhere over here, he like walks slowly, and then if you kill enough units, then he just pulls in the backline carry and he can scam a victory. So I'm actually more of a fan of the front line for like those 2 reasons, but like of course decide for yourself. Attack Golem, these 2 you usually can't go wrong. This one sometimes can be a grief, especially if the Ornn artifact and the emblem isn't super useful, then it becomes a little bit awkward, at least when I look at it. Then we have Alistar, Pot of Gold. So Alistar is pretty much low variance a lot of the times. Typically you're going to be just like deciding if you're going to be splitting a pot or pushing it further. If you're making econ early, you might want to push it until later just because like you have the gold anyways, so you don't want other people to hit those econ intervals and become very aggressive. And additionally, if it helps you to make econ early, I would typically just decide to cash out, just decide which is better for you and then decide to do it. Of course, it could be really high roll if you are strong. If you play aggressive and you have a really strong board and you get the early gold cash out from this, or even a late game gold cash out to kind of bail you out if you've like spent all your gold and not hit anything, then it can sometimes end up being a little bit of high roll. Next we have Twisted Fate. So Twisted Fate is reroll subscription. So this is around a 4% encounter, and it's typically, in my opinion, kind of low variance, but similar to the other ones, a little bit high roll in certain cases. The idea is that it gives you a bunch of free rerolls, so you can often play anything, but usually reroll can be a little bit better because you're able to use those rolls at a very low level and spike your board really early. Additionally, because it starts the game out with rerolls, if you're looking to like win streak, you can actually roll on the 3 odds a little bit because you have some free rerolls to use on like turn 1, try and find some upgrades and make your board really strong early. Be prepared because the rerollers often will hit earlier and harder, especially if they have a good reroll spot because they're getting this influx of gold early. But you can often keep the rerolls for later rolls. It's a little bit more, I would say, tailored towards reroll a lot of the time here because obviously like the rerolls you want to use them early and be strong. That helps you out a lot, but they don't help you to make interest, which is usually what you need for like those late game boards. Like if you just get upfront gold, for example, you have the flexibility of spending your gold early or saving it to make interest for later. So if you get these rerolls, like sometimes you might have trouble making econ intervals, and then by the time you make it to high level, you already lost a lot of HP. It can be a little bit awkward, but you could basically play anything. I've had success with both rerolls and non-reroll comps with this setup, with this encounter, so I'm not too leaning heavy one way or the other. Next, we have accelerated augments with the Azir. This is a 4% encounter, and I say that's a low variance. Like, I don't think it's super high variance if I have to pick binary, but it can also be very awkward. Like, I don't know personally, because some games just get out of hand really fast. The idea is that you get augments earlier and you get a lot more direction. Sometimes there's some broken combinations of, like, if you get the augments too early, you can get, like, stuff that, you know, might not be able to be offered in tandem with each other normally, and then you just have, like, a really cool situation. But typically, I would say it can be high roll or low roll. But more generally, it's just like, you know, normal variance, right? It can be whatever. The idea is that if you have a strong early game board and like you have a lot of direction, then you can have a really easy game because you don't have to make a lot of decisions later. So it can be very forcing, but it can kind of help. Additionally, if you tailor your game early, you can actually get some early direction or stuff that relates to your board very, very well. And if you can't tailor your board, or if you're really weak early, you might be getting steamrolled and you might have to take generic augments because you might not have the information. A lot of spacing out of the augments, what helps with that is that if you're not in a really good spot early game, you can still decide what you're going to do later and kind of figure it out, like, you know, later in the game, so to speak. If you're like weak early and you have to select all these augments, you know, you can't just like select something that's like very forcing, like an emblem or anything like that, because you don't even know if you're going to play around that or play around those units, or even hit those units. So it could be awkward, right? And that's what I mean. It's awkward to me when I play it. It's like sometimes it's all right, sometimes it's fine, sometimes it feels like it's like not even an encounter, it's just like, yeah, whatever. But then sometimes it just feels like, oh, like I don't know, like I just can't get my footing right now because these other people just have such good setups, and I have to take generic because I don't know what I'm doing. So that's why I say awkward, right? I don't want to say high variance because I don't have enough of an opinion to say that that, like, you know, you gotta be like careful around it. Next we have hacked eggs. So there's a 4-round egg, a 9-round egg, and a 13-round egg. This is a 4% encounter. It's typically, I want to say low variance. Sorry, I shouldn't say high variance here. I think it's pretty low variance. It's high variance only in certain points because sometimes the egg cash out could be kind of crazy. But the eggs, you basically cash them out with loot. Typically you take a 9-turn egg, that's like the go-to, and I'll show you why. But the eggs also count down faster if you lose rounds. This means that, as a general tip, scout other boards. The loot is the same. If other people take a 9-turn egg, whatever the loot is, it will be the same loot for you. Not like the exact same components or units or stuff like that, but it'll be the same type of egg cash out. So pay attention to that because it can help you to plan ahead, especially if you're not cashing out the egg early. So it's typically just like a normal, like low variance, like, you know, you just play it. Nothing super crazy to write home about, you just play around it. But there's some of the cash outs that can be really crazy, and you could play towards like those win cons and have like those giga games. Typically 4-turn egg is a little bit underpowered. I wouldn't really take 4-turn egg unless I'm in a really bad spot, because the 9-turn egg doesn't take that long to cash out as long as you like survive. Usually you cash it out within a stage because you lose 1 or 2 rounds, and then you just win the rest. So it's typically the 9-turn egg. There is the spatula, which is always scary, right? If somebody has some sort of giga win condition, you get a spatula for free. You get components, you can get 5 costs, which can sometimes spike your board, especially if you hit the units that you need to hit. Then radiant items and artifacts. Anvil. So just be prepared to play around it, but typically 9-turn egg is considered to be like kind of all right. 13-turn egg, some of them are like not that great. Like this one with the 5 cost and the champ dupe, it's basically like this one, except you get a dupe and 1 less 5 cost. It's like some of them, they just feel bad for when you cash it out. There used to be some worse ones, so they made this a little bit better. But of course, I would only take 13-round egg if I know for sure that I'm so strong that I'm going to cash this out and kind of like giga win. Typically, the safe play is usually just 9-turn egg. And of course, like I said, there could be some crazy things that happen on. So it could be like kind of high variance, but a lot of times, your cash outs are going to be relatively all right. And because it happens so late in the game, like stuff like artifact and radiant item, a lot of times you can just like make use of it, try and find something that works. Nobody's really going to have like some kind of like, or sorry, I shouldn't say nobody's going to have. Sometimes you can have some broken combination late game, but it's not very often because they're not like specifically playing around it. It's mostly just like capping out your board late game around it. So just be careful there. Next is extra augments. So extra augments, they can either, oh, I think I have it a little bit cut off, But basically, there's 4% round that you get, 4% that you get an extra augment stage 2, 4% stage 3, 4% stage 4, and then I believe it's 2% stage 5, and I wrote 2% stage 6, so I just miswrote it a bit. But the last one that occurs on stage 5 that would be a 2%. That one's a little bit lower. I consider these to be low or high variance because it really depends on what the augments are and how things work out. A lot of times you want to be prepared. Early options you might want to tailor for certain augments or traits, similar to how I was talking about with the moved up augments portion. But additionally, later versions you want to pick augments that could complete your board. You want to take things that either like give you combat power, give you items if you're missing items, find a synergy that works. Also, I'm sorry about the picture. This is a picture I took off Reddit. I didn't get to replace it on the slide. Those are not real augments. It was a meme that somebody made. But credits to the meme on Reddit. My apologies. I didn't get to screenshot the picture I was using in the previous slide. But anyways, I typically find that the middle ones are the least variance and the most fun. So like the 4% stage 3 and the 4% stage 4. The reason I like those is because you have enough time to evaluate what you want to take based on encounters. When you have the early augments, sometimes you might take stuff that you might not need, and then you're wasting an entire extra augment. Like in the perfect world, you just take an extra combat augment and you make your board as strong as possible. But sometimes, like, you know, if it's a low item game, because that happens a lot now, you want to take extra items early just to make sure that you streak. Or if you feel like it's going to be a low gold game, maybe it's a 0 gold Krugs, right? Krugs can sometimes drop you no gold and then you're very poor for much of the early game. Then you want to take an extra econ augment, right? So I like to have them on the stage 3, stage 4 because it's easier to like figure out what you need in order to play based on what has already occurred in the game. But the stage 2 and the stage 5 one, those ones on the extremities, the stage 5, it just happens so late that it's like, it feels like, you know, somebody could just hit like a giga combat late game and then just spike their board and just like throw things out of whack. And the stage 2 one, you might take augments that you might not need because the encounters fill in those gaps for you and makes it a little bit awkward later. Next, we have Lucky Shops. So Lucky Shops, 2% encounter, typically low variance, sometimes high roll. The idea is that you're going to get once per stage a shop that has units that are tailored to your board. This means that they're going to be relative to some of the traits that you have on your board. So in the past, it was like based on the amount of units that you put on your board, but I don't know how the rules are anymore because I have not had like a detailed information breakdown of how it works and I couldn't find that information somewhere. But typically you want to play synergies on your board that make sense with the units that you want to hit. Strong vertical traits can help a lot. Think like anima, for example. If you just play all anima units, you have a really high likelihood of getting anima in. However, if you play like a mixed board, like even like a Vanguard marksman board, sometimes you can hit like some useless units. Or if you have a board that has like random synergies in, you can sometimes hit some random units that aren't very lucky and then it just feels really bad. But if you're playing like, you know, a trait like anima, you know that no matter what, you're going to buy every unit in that shop because they're all going to be anima units, and those anima units, you love to upgrade them as well, right? A random 3-star anima unit actually spikes the anima board. That's like something that works really nicely with that type of encounter. And there's other examples of this too, like nitro sometimes, or like even 5 cost can work really well. One example is I had was what's it called? A Zac, right? If you play Zac, the virus counts as a trait, so you actually have a good chance of seeing a Zac in your lucky shop. So I actually got Zac 2 for free because my lucky shop tailored to give me a Zac. Like that's another interaction you can look for. You can also consider rerolls, obviously. If you're playing a reroll and you just get early copies of the units, you can just like hit the 3-star by just having the units in. Additionally, sometimes people pay attention, scout boards, they randomly hit 3-star 4 costs, right? If somebody's just like on level 8 rolling and then Lucky Shop just gives you a bunch of like Zayas, all of a sudden you have Zaya 3 and you win the game. So just be careful about that as well. And hold on to extra copies of units if you're in a spot that you can do so. Next we have Mecha Minions. I think this is the last one. So this is 2-star shops. I don't have a picture for it, but basically 2% encounter, low variance, sometimes high roll. The idea is that you're gonna have a unit in your shop is gonna be lucky that it's gonna be upgraded. Think of it similar to like a much more less frequent Starry Night, where you just have an upgraded unit. It could be good with reroll. I like comps that spike with random 3-stars. Think anima. I was talking about it before. I really like that with the lucky shops because if you can just hit like, you know, a Silas 3 randomly or a Seraphine 3 randomly, it can really like help to scale your board into a really powerful state to late game. Additionally, you want to consider tempo, right? If you can just have an upgraded unit, you can tempo around it. I like to also play high levels. Like, I know I said you can also reroll with this. You might be able to get like the unit that you need and hit a 3-star, but I'm not super, like, how do I phrase it? I'm not super happy with the reroll versions, because I would rather just push levels and play around comps that could spike around a 3-star or play aggressively with tempo, because when you get to high levels, you can get an upgraded 5 cost and just randomly. So you're just rolling your shop. Spaghetti-o, that's a Zac 2 in my shop, or that's a Garen 2, or that's an Aurora 2, and you just get an upgraded 5 cost. So I really like to be high level, just because I feel like it's just really beneficial and it can make your board extremely strong in those endgame scenarios. But anyways, thanks for watching. That was the encounter guide. Tried to go through it as easily as possible. Hopefully it was helpful. Hopefully it gave you some, like, a little bit of tips if you're looking for something to help you out, like, you know, plan out your games a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of the edge cases and some of the other stuff, like the black market augments and stuff like that. That's due. I'm just, like, you know, slowly procrastinating on the item guide that I'm struggling to make because of the item changes that I have to do a lot of edits to it. So working on that still, and it should be out very soon. Thanks for watching. Have a great day and see ya. Bye bye.